Our speaker is Jacqueline Lechuga from Texas A&M University San Antonio in the United States. Today, she presents her talk on the topic, Exploring the Complexity of Ambivalent Terms of Endearment in Latino Romantic Relationships.
Welcome. I'm Dr. Lechuga. I'm an assistant professor from Texas A&M University at San Antonio. And today for the next couple of minutes, I will talk to you about some of my research on ethnic differences, specifically in the usage of a particular term of endearment that may be problematic. Although endearments are intended to be used to express affection towards something or someone, there's a small body of literature that has shown that even those seemingly innocent and endearing phrases can have negative outcomes for others. So specifically, gender terms of endearment such as honey have been shown to promote benevolent sexism, or elder speak terms such as sweetie to decrease cognitive functioning in the elderly population. There is cross-cultural variation in the meaning and function of endearments. Anecdotally, ambivalent terms of endearment, which have both positive and negative connotations, are common in Latino communities. For instance, gordo, gorda, or flaco, flaca are terms of endearments that are very typical in Latino romantic relationships, which could be strange to others as these terms of endearments directly translate to fat or skinny, so pointing out basically the body composition of their partners, which again would not be necessarily accepted in other cultures, but within the Latino communities is something that is recognized as affectionate. Now, in the last 5 years, we saw the rise of tóxico-tóxica as a term of endearment, specifically in the Latino community. Now, for those of you who might need the translation for this, tóxico-tóxica translates directly to toxic. So even though Latinos are using this term in a humorous and affectionate way, they're still implying that there are problematic relational dynamics within their romantic relationships, but then also paradoxically, they are implying some intimacy and commitment. Interestingly, as I mentioned, it seems to be some kind of paradox that although they're recognizing the negative aspects of the romantic partners, they're also still reassuring their commitment to their partners. And one of the ways that this has been shown in actual behavior is through the purchase and use of merchandise that promotes this idea that, again, you have a toxic romantic partner. So here I have an example of such case. We have a couple t-shirts that have the word tóxico, tóxica, so that again the intention is each one of them will wear the t-shirts, but then communicate that they are a couple. The other thing that I want to point out within this particular image is the labels that are being used, or the keywords that are being used for others to find this kind of products. Specifically here, it's labeled as a Mexican couple t-shirt. So again, it's pointing out to the idea that it is Latinos, and especially those of Mexican descent, who are using this specific term of endearment. Also, if you look at the name of the shop who is specifically selling these t-shirts, you see that it's a Latino pride shop. So again, this is something that seems to be more relevant within the Latino community, and something that even though it has a negative connotation, they're not necessarily like removing themselves from the term. They really are committed to the term and using it within their relationships. In this investigation, we tested if there are any ethnic differences in the exposure, use, perceptions, and feelings that are associated with tóxico-tóxica as a term of endearment in romantic relationships. We had two a priori predictions. Our first prediction was that Latinos, in comparison to non-Latinos, would report greater exposure and use of this particular term of endearment. And our second prediction was that Latinos, in comparison to non-Latinos, would report more favorable perceptions and feelings, again associated with tóxico-tóxica, specifically used as a term of endearment. We also had some exploratory questions. We were specifically interested in also testing the association between the exposure and usage of tóxico-tóxica, specifically as a term of endearment, and having a history of abusive relationships. Our second exploratory question was doing a qualitative investigation of the behaviors and motivations that were associated with the label Tóxica Tóxico. An a priori power analysis indicated that we needed 150 participants per ethnic group for us to have 80% power to test our effects. Now, our final sample was composed of 261 participants, 127 Latinos, and 134 non-Latinos. Our sample was primarily female and white, and the mean age was 20 years old. Our participants were first asked to report on their exposure to tóxico-tóxica as a term of endearment. Participants were given some information about the negative connotation that the direct translation of tóxico-tóxica has, which is toxic, but they were also given information that now the term tóxico-tóxica is being used as a term of endearment. And when asked to report on their exposure to tóxico-tóxica, we were asking them specifically to think whether they had been exposed to these terms when used as a term of endearment. Then participants were asked to report on the use of tóxico-tóxica as a term of endearment across different levels. First, individual. So we had items like, have you used tóxico-tóxica as a term of endearment for a romantic interest? At their social network, so for instance, have people close to you use tóxico-tóxica as a term of endearment for their romantic interest? And then in their extended community, have others from your ethnic racial group use tóxico-tóxica as a term of endearment for their romantic interest? Within this, we also had open-ended items such as how have they specifically witnessed this behavior within the same ethnic group, or which ethnic group have they witnessed this behavior from if they were asked about the usage of this term in different ethnic groups. Participants also reported on their perceptions of tóxico-tóxica as a term of endearment. Specifically, they answer how negative, positive, acceptable, common, romantic, problematic, and funny tóxico-tóxico as a term of endearment is. And they also reported on their feelings associated with self-labeling as tóxico or tóxica. They did those ratings across 12 positive feelings such as caring, powerful, accepted, and 12 negative feelings such as anxious, guilty, and overwhelmed. Lastly, participants were asked to complete 2 open-ended questions related to the behaviors and motivations that they associate with someone who is tóxico or tóxica. And they also answer 1 item where they reported their prior experience of abuse. Specifically, have you ever experienced any form of abuse in a past romantic relationship? We did give them a description of the different kind of behaviors that fell under the umbrella of abusive or unhealthy romantic relationships. So they had some guidance in understanding what we were referring to as abuse. Now getting into our results, we did see that Latinos were in fact significantly more likely than non-Latinos to report being familiar with tóxico-tóxica as a term of endearment. Now, in all other analyses, we only used those participants, Latinos and non-Latinos, who indicated yes to prior exposure to tóxico-tóxica, again, as a term of endearment. Now, here in this table, we have all the items that we use to assess the usage of tóxico-tóxica across those 3 levels that I mentioned previously: individual, social network, and extended community. Here, the first finding that I want to focus on is on the item, has a romantic interest, use tóxico-tóxica as a term of endearment for you. As you can see, Latinos, in comparison to non-Latinos, were more likely to report having a romantic partner who has used tóxico-tóxica to refer to them. Our second significant finding was on the item, have others from your ethnic racial group used tóxico-tóxica as a term of endearment for their romantic interests, where specifically we saw that Latinos, in comparison to non-Latinos, were more likely to report that others of their same ethnic racial group used toxico-toxica to refer to their romantic partners. Through the written responses, we saw that people were indicating that the use of toxico-toxica as a term of endearment was primarily observed through social media platforms or in person through car decals. Our last significant finding was on the item, have others from an ethnic racial group other than yours used toxico-toxica as a term of endearment for their romantic interest. Here we saw specifically that non-Latinos, in comparison to Latinos, were more likely to report that others from an ethnic racial group different from theirs use toxico-toxica to refer to the romantic partners. And through the written responses, we saw that the most mentioned ethnic racial group were specifically Hispanics or Latinos. Related to our perception items, we also had multiple significant differences, where specifically we noticed that Latinos, in comparison to non-Latinos, rated toxico-toxica as a term of endearment to be less negative and less problematic. On a similar note, we also saw the Latinos, in comparison to non-Latinos, rated toxico-toxica more positively, common, and funnier. In regards to their feelings associated with self-labeling as toxico-toxica, we did not see any difference when it came to the specific positive feelings, but we did see a significant difference in the negative feelings. Specifically, we saw that Latinos reported feeling less negatively about self-labeling as toxico-toxica than non-Latinos. Moving on to our exploratory findings, again, we tested the association between having a history of abuse and exposure and use of toxico-toxica as a term of endearment. We did not see any significant findings to being exposed to toxico-toxica as a term of endearment, but usage of toxico-toxica as an endearment was associated with a history of abuse. Specifically, we found that calling a romantic partner toxico-toxica, being called toxico-toxica by a romantic partner, and having close others who call the romantic partners toxico-toxica were positively associated with having a history of abuse. Interestingly, we also found that participants with a history of abuse were also more likely to report that others from an ethnic racial group different than theirs used toxico-toxica as a term of endearment to refer to the romantic partners. And from our qualitative data related to the behaviors and motivations of a toxico-toxica, we saw that the most common behaviors mentioned were being controlling, jealous, and/or unfaithful, and that the most common motivations were being insecure, jealous, or having past experiences such as trauma. Due to our sample composition, we also tested gender as a moderator. Specifically, we found that Latino females were more likely to report being exposed to toxico-toxica as a term of endearment. However, we replicated all of our findings using a female-only sample, except findings related to the use of toxico-toxica when asked about ethnic racial groups different than their own, which in this case were not significant. In summary, Latinos, in comparison to non-Latinos, reported greater exposure to toxico-toxica as a term of endearment, greater usage of toxico-toxica as a term of endearment, more favorable perceptions, and more favorable feelings, specifically in experiencing lower emotional distress from self-labeling as a toxico-toxica. We also found that having a history of abuse was related to the use of toxico-toxica as a term of endearment for a romantic partner. However, our data is not able to speak about what is the direction of this association. We also found that the label of toxico-toxica is aligned with the expectation of engaging in negative behaviors such as being controlling, and that these behaviors are motivated by negative experiences such as past trauma. Lastly, our findings were influenced by gender, with Latino women primarily accounting for the observed effects. Our study is the first to systematically investigate the phenomenon of toxico-toxica as a term of endearment. Findings strongly support that this is a culture-specific dynamic within Latino romantic relationships, highlighting a potential cultural difference in how people demonstrate and accept love from others, which may further increase their risk of experiencing intimate partner violence. Thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions or comments, I'm including here my contact information. Again, my name is Jacqueline Lechuga, and I'm an assistant professor at Texas A&M University, San Antonio. I've also included information from my two collaborators who aided in some aspects of this investigation and are writing this manuscript with me.